Okay, so the Nintendo Switch 2 has been in my grubby lizard claws for about 3 months now, so what do I think about it? It's cool. Kidding. There's way more than that, I promise. Look, I've been a fan of the Switch since it came out back in 2017. I've always preferred my games to be on a handheld if possible, so I should, by default, be happy to suggest what is, in a lot of ways, a newer and better Switch. Well, sort of. It's way more complicated than that. I mean, think about it. How would you review a console that follows one of Nintendo's most successful systems of all time, especially when its target audience feels so different from that of the original? The Nintendo Switch 2, in a lot of ways, is an iterative design. It's a second Switch. Still, it diverges from that ideology by reinventing who it aims to please and what it's capable of. In a lot of ways, the biggest changes stem from intentions, rather than the differences on paper. I'll get more into this later, but there are some big diversions from the status quo for Nintendo. Build quality. When I pulled the Nintendo Switch 2 out of its box, the first thing I noted is that it feels premium. It should be expected at the steeper price of $450, but I digress. This console is hefty, slick, and built well. There's no creaking when you grip the system in your hands, the Joy-Con 2 controllers sit firmly attached to the console with no wiggling, and the kickstand is stable and easy to pull from the tablet. I really appreciate that. The entire console is finished with this matte black sort of texture, so it looks sleek and mature. Plus, it doesn't show fingerprint smudges and other nasty stuff, at least on the actual system. The screen is another story, but, yeah, it's a screen, so it's gonna get smudged. Anyways, it remains nice to look at even after heavy use. Comfort. On a comfort note, I'm really glad to say that the Nintendo Switch 2 feels very comfortable to use. It's pretty big, so I was expecting it to feel unwieldy, but that isn't the case. For starters, the controllers that come in the box feel great. I'm happy to report that the Joy-Con 2 are markedly easy to use in my adult hands, mostly due to that larger size compared to the first ones. Buttons aren't hard to reach and have this satisfying click to them, so they don't feel too loud or plasticky, which is really nice. The L and R buttons kinda curve down on the side of the controllers, which makes them way easier to press in handheld mode, and the analog sticks are smooth to push around, even if the travel isn't as far as a traditional controller. Something that some folks might feel a little uncomfortable with is that the controllers are digital, so they don't have that analog pull to them like most modern console controllers do. But for durability reasons, I can see why they decided against it. And something else to note is that I do have to say that younger gamers aren't going to find the system very comfortable. It's way too big for little hands, at least in handheld mode. When you're playing on the TV or a monitor, you're probably going to use the Joy-Con 2 grip, which is fine, I guess. It's really light and the handles are weirdly flat on the front. It's not as bad as I initially thought it would be, but I really wish that Nintendo would have included the nicer charging grip that they sell separately for a whopping $40. That one comes with the new GL and GR buttons on the back of the controller, which comes standard with the Switch 2 Pro controller. Oh, and by the way, if you want that nicer Switch 2 controller, it's $85. That's a lot of money for the average person, so I wouldn't suggest this new controller to anyone but the biggest Nintendo fans, even if it seems very nice, which it is. It's comfy and has the best analog sticks I've ever used on any controller, but once again, $85 is just too much to justify. Sorry, Nintendo. Back to the Joy-Con 2 for just a second longer. Much like their predecessor, they're designed to be split up and used on their sides as individual controllers. It's actually a really cool feature that's totally slept on by a lot of people, and I think that's why the D-pad had to be separated into face buttons, but that flexibility is a totally fair trade-off. My coworkers and I played Mario Kart World on a work break, and the split Joy-Con 2 still felt very comfy to use, and they didn't cramp up my hands like I thought that they would. Generally, the controllers that come with the system are good enough, I guess. I mean, I do wish that the other options were way cheaper. Price concerns feel like a consistent thing with my review, to be completely honest, and this isn't the last time we'll talk about price, but it might be a bit of a problem for a lot of folks. Performance. Alrighty, performance on the Nintendo Switch 2 is mightily impressive for a handheld system, even if it can only really be taken advantage of by dedicated Switch 2 software. For those of you who are a bit more technically savvy, in handheld mode, the screen goes up to 120 frames per second at 1080p with HDR10 and VRR support. And in docked mode, it does the same stuff and up to 4K, minus VRR, which is a bit of a bummer, to be honest, especially for those unstable frame rates. In non-techie terms, games look awesome in both modes and run pretty well from my personal experience. For starters, Nintendo Switch 2 titles run great. Mario Kart World, the star of the Nintendo Switch 2's launch, runs flawlessly. The game targets 1440p in dock mode and 1080p in handheld mode with a 60fps refresh, and it's gorgeous. The world is detailed and expansive, the art style rocks, and the game doesn't have any hitches. Cyberpunk 2077, another launch title for the system, is a great example of how bigger titles from the current generation of consoles might make their way over. This game is gorgeous and vibrant on the Switch 2. It's not as impressive as the PC or PS5 versions, but that's fine. It's an awesome version of Cyberpunk on a handheld, which is just nuts. The game runs at 30 FPS, but the dense, moody visuals of Night City remain intact. Character models and textures are sharp and detailed as well, and I've only had a few instances of slowdown, one of which fixed itself after I reloaded a save. If I had to compare it to anything, I'd say it's very similar to what you would expect to get on an Xbox Series S, which in my opinion bodes well for future third-party support. Obviously, ports of games aren't going to look as amazing as they do on a PlayStation 5 or a high-end PC, but that's totally fine. You can play this thing anywhere, like when you're basking on a rock or taking a shit or something. I don't know, it's cool. Back to the past with backwards compatibility. Switch 2 games aren't the only games you'll be playing, as there are 3 types of software that you'll be able to use on the Switch 2. There's, of course, Nintendo Switch 2 games, original Nintendo Switch games, and Nintendo Switch 2 Edition games with big ol' air quotes, because those are basically just Switch 1 games that have been updated to support the new Switch 2 features. For the most part, I've had a great time with all 3, but there are some notable caveats, mainly with the backwards compatibility mode. For now though, let's start with the good stuff. Original Nintendo Switch games just run way better on the Switch 2. Anything that had an unlocked frame rate on the original will run at a locked 60 for the most part on the new hardware. Some examples of this include Bomb Rush Cyberpunk by Reptile Games. I love fellow reptiles, so yay you guys. Resident Evil 5 and Minecraft. Games that have locked frame rates will still cap at 30, but they should be far more stable than the original could manage. On the other hand, and at no fault to the Nintendo Switch 2, some games are pretty low resolution on the handheld display. The original Switch only had a 720p panel, so that's what it maxes out to in the handheld mode for older games. A lot of games on the original Switch ran at even lower resolutions than 720p, which makes them look super chunky and a bit blurry on the new one. A good example of this issue is Dead by Daylight, which hasn't received an update for the Switch 2 yet. Without sugarcoating it, this game looks terrible on both the original hardware and its successor. It's extremely pixelated and textures look smeary and almost clay-like. The game is also stuck at an uneven 30 frames, so playing on the new hardware isn't going to be a magic pill for some games. However, these issues can be smoothed over with Nintendo Switch 2 Edition games. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, for example, run at a much sharper resolution, and the frame rate is more than doubled on the new system. Same goes for games like The Legend of Zelda and No Man's Sky, so as more developers update their games, the aforementioned resolution issues in backwards compatibility mode should become way less relevant. Pricing. Again. Unfortunately, all of these previously mentioned improvements don't come for free, and that really sucks. Nintendo isn't the first to charge for upgraded games, but they are definitely among the most aggressive when it comes to pricing legacy content. I should clarify that this is not always the case. I'm not glazing Nintendo, of course, but there are still some games that don't cost extra to update. However, the games that do are frustrating, and $10 to $20 extra for games that came out years ago is just egregious. These games don't go on sale nearly as often as other companies' games, which means you're probably stuck with that retail price unless you buy used. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on the Nintendo Wii U was $60. 8 years later, the same game on the Nintendo Switch 2 is $70 new, and that doesn't even come with the DLC, which is another $20. So if you want that full Zelda Breath of the Wild experience, an 8-year-old game by the way, you're gonna be paying $90. There were no bones thrown to early adopters, and that makes me nervous for the pricing structure on future Nintendo titles. Don't get me wrong, I still think that the new system is an awesome improvement over the original, albeit a far less accessible one. This shit's expensive, dude. The entry price of $450 is still pretty reasonable considering the specs and build quality, but the games and accessories are super expensive. Who the hell is gonna blow $80 on Mario Kart? Well, shit man, I did, despite my mind and my wallet telling me that it's a stupid idea. Look, the game itself is awesome. I love it. There's a lot of depth to the new movement options and the open world is fun. Does it justify its price like Mr. Nintendo of America President Doug Bowser actually says it does? No, like, not at all. Ethically, I'd tell y'all to buy the game on a cartridge used, but that implies that people are going to be selling a new game right away. It's hard to tell people that, yeah, all these games are totally worth $80, when I know they aren't. Nintendo wants to sell a 15-hour-long Kirby game from 4 years ago at $80 just because it's 4K and has some DLC. That's so incredibly tone-deaf in this economy. Whatever, I think that the game pricing sucks, and my choice to purchase the game was out of a curiosity to see if the game justified its price tag. It didn't. It's a sad and frustrating shift away from the $200 console era of Nintendo that we saw with stuff like the Switch Lite, and an even more frustrating shift away if you remember like the 3DS era, where games could go as low as $20. A shift in audience. I don't think that the Switch 2 is as suited to be a family-oriented console, at least not like the Switch 1 was. Sure, there are kids games on the system, but that's not everything. Like, it is not kids-friendly in the slightest in terms of form factor, and just like take a gander at the games announced for the system. Duskbloods, Cyberpunk 2077, Daemon X Machina, Titanic Scion, and Hitman aren't exactly family-friendly titles. Nintendo still has first-party heavyweights like Mario and Pokemon that'll always appeal to kids, but it's still hard to ignore the definite shift in the target audience overall. Even Nintendo's focus on fancy hardware specs like 4K, HDR, and 120Hz feel like they're trying to appeal to core gamers, especially in tandem with the more mature software lineup and all this catering to older fans, with features like Game Chat in the GameCube Classics lineup being spotlighted. Add all this up with the pricing woes, and it paints a picture that would make some Nintendo Switch 1 fans turn their heads and scoff. A couple of months ago, I wrote a blog post about the pricing structure and how even I, a big Nintendo fan and someone who likes to write about video games, felt uncomfortable with the value proposition. I bit the bullet anyways, partially because I really wanted to review the thing, and while I do really love this system, I also understand why people would choose to skip it for now and why there's so much backlash. So, in conclusion, I really like the Nintendo Switch 2. It's a worthy successor to the first one, no doubt about it. Actually, I would say it's an impressive piece of gaming hardware that stands on its own as something special even. It's a robust, mature, and versatile take on Nintendo's hybrid concept, and I think that it'll be far more capable than the first one at delivering that Nintendo charm in spades, as well as everything else offered by third-party companies. Plus, the console is built well, has awesome performance, and is generally a great experience to use. On the other hand, these upgrades come at a cost in more ways than one. Pricing is a big concern on games, but it's deeper than that. Like I said before, this console is aimed at more mature audiences, and I think that some Switch 1 fans might feel a little bit alienated by all these changes. Parents are going to tell their kids that they already have Mario Kart at home, and more casual gamers who only occasionally play like the Jackbox games and Mario Party aren't even going to give the system a chance. Would I recommend it? For most adult gamers, sure. It's really cool to have a powerful Nintendo system for what feels like the first time in forever. But there are caveats, especially with the price. Maybe wait for more games to come out or for more people to start selling their titles used. Honestly, it's probably a bit more ethical to avoid supporting this pricing structure if you can, so buying used games locally might be the move. In addition, maybe wait for a Switch 2 Lite or something if you're trying to buy it for a kiddo. I'm sure that one will be cheaper and more comfy to use for their little hands. Once again, I just have to reiterate this because I've been doing a lot of complaining, but I fucking dig this thing. It's kind of fallen into a spot where I'm not using my Xbox or my Mac to play games anymore because the Switch 2 no longer feels like the compromise that the first one was. It's portable power, and yes, I am quoting the Game Boy ads. If we keep getting cool games on the system, I see no reason why I would personally choose another system to play these games on, and I'm sure a lot of folks will feel the same. Anyways, thank you so much for watching Lizard Pushing Buttons. This is my first video, so I'm super excited to have this posted. This review was adapted from a blog posted on my personal website. Link is below for those of you who are interested in reading this instead, and I hope to create more awesome reviews for you folks viewing on your big screens, or little screens, or medium-sized screens. I don't know what you guys are watching this on. Yeah, thanks a bunch. Later, Gators.